Okay, so chapter 17, last night we finished up talking about the sales comparison approach, and just one more time so I would sleep tonight, what properties are best valued using the sales comparison approach?
Residential and vacant lots.
Residential and vacant land, good. So now we want to move along to the next sort of process of valuing property, and I'm actually going to do it in the reverse order of your book. In your book it has the cost approach next. I'm going to skip ahead and do the income capitalization approach because that one should be very familiar to you in some ways. On page 405, the income capitalization approach is a way of valuing property where the value of the property is based on the income that the property produces. Now, if you remember, if you pull out your formula packet you've got in here, you actually have, I'll give you the page number, on page 11 in your formula packet, you have the formula for the income approach to value. And it's a really simple T-bar formula, and we call it IRV. And in this T-bar, which looks like this, I sort of switch things up. I can't spell, so I put the R on the right side, always because I like to keep my rates on the right side. So when you look at this, IRV, the I stands for income, but it's a particular type of income that you guys are already familiar with, called the net operating income. So it's actually the NOI. Do you remember the net operating income? Does everybody remember that terminology from a couple chapters ago?
Yes.
When we talked about property management? Well, this whole chapter, what are we trying to calculate for these properties in this chapter? The value. So what do you think the V stands for here?
Value.
Value. And then the R is going to be a rate, but it's a particular type of rate called a cap rate or capitalization rate. Okay? So that's your T-bar formula. We want to talk about the different things that are in there. Well, number one, first and foremost, is the net operating income. So the way to think of the income approach to value is to think that investors, because these are the people who buy income-producing properties, they're only willing to pay for the property based on the income that it's going to produce for them in the future. Does that make sense? They don't have, I mean, like whoever owns this building, he doesn't look at this building and go, gosh, I just love this building. I'm so glad I bought it. What does he care about at the end of the year? How much rent, how much income he is taking away from this property. And how much he likes this property is directly tied to how much money he can squeeze out of this property. Would you agree with that? Mm-hmm. So therefore he values this property more if it produces more what? Income. He values it less if it produces less income. And that's the truth for any income producing property. And that's why we don't do adjustments when we talk about valuing income producing property. We simply calculate the value based on the income that that property is producing. Now that's half of the equation, right? The income piece. What's the other half down here? The cap rate, capitalization rate. That's a fancy way of saying how fast I get my money back. It's my rate of return on my investment. The capitalization rate and a rate of return are the exact same thing. So what that means is that if I say something has a cap rate of 10%, that means the owner of the property is getting 10% of their investment back every year in the form of net operating income. So therefore, if they paid $100,000 for the property, they're getting how much back every year as income? $10,000. Does that make sense for everybody? If I've invested $100,000 and I'm getting a 10% return, 10% of $100,000 is $10,000. So that's exactly what my formula would look like over here. My cap rate is 10%. And my value was $100,000 because I said that's what I paid for the property. Then it must be producing $10,000 a year in income. Everybody follow with that? Now, here's the interesting thing about cap rates. A lot of times the cap rate in the real world is sort of invented out of thin air. That seems weird. It's not really, though. How do investors decide where to invest their money? How do you pick and choose investments? Which one will give you the best return, right? So you look around, you shop around, you look at stocks, you look at bonds, you look at mutual funds, you look at car washes, you look at apartment complexes, you look at office buildings, you look at residential properties, you look at a bunch of different things and you say, where can I get the greatest return on my investment? Another way you might say it is, I tell you what, Mr. Real Estate Broker Travis, if you can find me anything that gets me a 9% return on my money, I'll buy it, and I don't care what it is. It can be a popsicle stand, an office building, a skating rink, a shopping mall, I don't care as long as it gets me a 9% return. What is that 9% otherwise known as?
The cap rate?
That's the cap rate. Because the investor is dictating to you what kind of return they want on their investment. Does that make sense for you guys? You following me so far? The capitalization rate is just how fast I'm getting my money back. So if the cap rate is 8%, I'm getting 8% of my investment back. How often? Every year. The cap rate is 12%, I'm getting 12% of my investment back every year. So here's a really tough question. Is it better to have a low cap rate or a high cap rate?
Higher.
High cap rate. We'd love to see a 100% capitalization rate. It'd be awesome, wouldn't it? You probably wouldn't have to keep that property on the market for very long.
If you had a 10% capitalization, why would you sell it?
Why would you do anything with it? You would keep it forever and ever, amen, right? So this idea of a cap rate is generated almost exclusively by the investor themselves. Now another way, but that's not the way that the appraiser can approach it. Because remember, this chapter is about us sitting in the shoes of, I need to value that thing. I need to look at that thing and I need to value it. Well, if I'm doing that, this piece is very easy to come up with. The net operating income. I can come up with the net operating income for a property because I can look at the books for that property. There's no guessing there. There's no art to that. Does that make sense for everybody? So if my job that I've been tasked with is to come up with a value for this building, I'm going to look at the books for this building. And what things go into net operating income? What do I want to know?
How many units are in the building?
How many units are in the building?
The vacancy?
What they rent for? The vacancy.
The expenses.
Any expenses that we've got as far as marketing the property, utilities, maintenance, management fees, if there's a property manager, all those things will be deducted out, and we finally get to boil down to net operating income. But it's just a matter of simple math because I've got the books in front of me, right? So what's the only other piece of the puzzle I need in order to come up with a value for this property? The cap rate. In this case, I don't have an investor saying, I want this return, I want that return, because I'm from the bank. And the bank has said, we want to know how much it's worth. In that case, I've got to look to other properties and compare other similar properties. We kind of go back to that same idea. And we want to compare and find the cap rate on those other similar properties so that we can apply that cap rate back to our subject property. Is everybody following that sort of mindset? So, looking at the formula, because it's going to use the same formula to get the cap rate for the other properties that I'm looking at. Let's say I want to sell this building. Or I want to finance this building. That's probably a better example. I want to finance this building. And the bank has sent me out here and they want a broker price opinion of this building. I can do that. I'm a full broker. Who can't do that? Who can't do broker price opinions, by the way? Provisional brokers cannot do broker price opinions. What is a broker price opinion?
It's a paid opinion on what what is a reasonable expected price for a piece of property.
That's exactly right. She said it's a paid opinion for what is a reasonable projected sales price of a property, a probable sales price, and who's getting paid? A real estate broker. That's called a broker price opinion. Provisional brokers can't do them, full brokers can't. So I could be sent out here by the bank. They'd probably send an appraiser, but they could send me. They say, we want you to do a BPO on that office building, because we want to make sure we're not lending too much money on it. So I come out here and I look at the books, and I've come up with the net operating income. The net operating income on this building, we're going to say, is $118,000 annually. I'm just making that up. But I've looked at the books and it's $118,000. But now the magic is I need to know a capitalization rate. So what other properties am I going to look at to try to determine that capitalization rate?
Office buildings in the area.
Other office buildings, and again, that have done what recently? Sold. Now here's where we differ a lot from the residential process. We really don't need them to be similar. As long as it's an office building, that's similar enough. And we really don't need it to be close by, because investors invest nationwide, worldwide even. So what you find is that capitalization rates are pretty much the same in Raleigh as they are in Omaha for investment property. Because here's the thing. Nobody's going to say, oh, I'm only going to buy that office building in Raleigh because I like Raleigh, if they know they can get a much higher return in Omaha. Where are they going to take their money? In Omaha. So that all washes out over time. Does that sort of make sense for everybody? So if I'm trying to come up with a capitalization rate, what I have to do as a broker coming up with that broker price opinion is I want to find 2 or 3, maybe 4 office buildings that are similar in that they're used for the same purpose, and maybe about the same age, and maybe about the same style. But that's it. One could be 3 times the size, one could be half the size, because here's the thing. That's all going to come out in the wash of their net operating income versus their sales price. That all washes out. So we don't have to be that similar. Am I making sense to you so far? I lost you? Good. So let's say I find 3 office buildings. And there are various places. One's in North Carolina, one's in South Carolina, and one's in Tennessee. Okay? And in office building number 1, it just sold about 2 months ago, and it sold for $3.8 million. Was the sales price. With a net operating income of $406,000 annually. And then I found another one that had a sales price of $1,160,000 with a net operating income of $124,000. Everybody good so far on that? And then I found number 3, and it had a sales price of $2.5 million with a net operating income of $247,500 NOI. If I've got those 2 statistics for each one of those properties, what can I calculate for each one of those individual properties if I want to? I can come up with a cap rate for each property, right? And could I not average those together and come up with an average capitalization rate for office buildings that are selling right now? Does that make sense for you guys? So that's exactly what I would do. I would come up with a cap rate. I would take, and then what does the T-bar say to do if I want to calculate the cap rate? It says to take the net operating income and divide it by what?
Sales price.
The value.
The value, which is going to be the sales price in this case. So what's number 1? $406,000 net operating income divided by a $3,800,000 value. What is my cap rate for property number 1?
10.68.
10 point how much?
10.68.
10.68%, because you're going to get 0.1068. And remember, anytime you're calculating a rate, what do you have to do? Multiply times 100. So we got 10.68% for comp number 1. How about comp number 2? $124,000 divided by 1.16 million.
10.69.
10.69% cap rate. Well, we got a big spread, don't we? And comp number 3 is a $247,500 NOI divided by $2.5 million. I mean, a little bit less than 10%.
9.9.
9.9%. And if I average the 3 of those together, what do I come up with for an average capitalization rate here?
10.39.
10.39.
I got 10.42.
10.42. We'll go with that. Close enough. 10.4% roughly. How about that? Split it down the middle. 10.4% cap rate. Now, if I'm doing that broker price opinion, what am I going to do with that 10.4% cap rate?
Multiply it by your net.
We'll plug it right back in over here at my property right here in Raleigh that I'm trying to value, right? I already know the net operating income of $118,000, so I'm going to plug my 10.4% cap rate into here. The formula just says net operating income divided by cap rate will tell me the value of this office building. So, $118,000 divided by 10.4%, what is my value?
$1,132,437.
We'll just go with that. We'll round it to thousands, right? What's $400 among friends? So roughly $1,132,000. I just rounded, okay, to the nearest thousand. Does anybody, is that Greek to any of you so far? Does that make sense? Remember, it's an income producing property, so the only things that matter are the income that it's producing and then comparing it to other properties of the same type to come up with something called a capitalization rate, which is just a rate of return. So the investor looks at that and they see they're getting 10.4% of their money back. Here's another way to discuss it. And I want to talk about it this way because you may see it sort of twisted on a test in these ways. How much is my investor willing to pay for this property if he wants a 10.4% return on his investment? How much? The number we came up with here, right? How about if the property is listed at $1.2 million? Is he going to get a 10.4% return on his money if he pays $1.2 million for it?
Not if it still produces the same.
The income can't change. We can't change that, right? Because I'm looking at the property. We know what the income is. The income is the income. So what I'm saying is my investor said, I want that 10.4%. So if he wants 10.4%, what's the maximum he's willing to pay for that property? $1,132,000. If we go $1 over $1,132,000, he's not getting his 10.4%. If we get it for less than $1,132,000, what happened to his rate of return, his capitalization rate? It goes up higher than his 10.4%. Is he satisfied with my services at that point in time? Absolutely. See, investors, they shop by cap rates. Honestly, I mean, I've got a guy who buys hotels, who I've worked with for years. And he has a standing order with me. If I can find him a hotel with a cap rate of 11, he'll buy it. And I asked him one time, well, what's your maximum capital outlay? He said, don't worry about that. Let me worry about that. He doesn't care, folks, what the maximum price is because he can access that kind of capital. If it's a $100 million property, he'd be okay with it. I wish I could find him a $100 million property. I wouldn't be teaching this class at night, I can tell you that, if I could find him that property. Because he'll buy it. But it's like Tracy said earlier. Remember what she said? If it was producing a 100% cap rate, why would you ever sell it? Well, it doesn't have to be producing 100% for somebody to say that. There's plenty of people out there who go, if it's producing 10%, why would I ever sell it? Because where else can they get a 10% return right now, right? So it's not as easy as it sounds when somebody just lays out there and says, I'll buy anything that'll get me this return. Problem is finding something that gets that return. We good? I'm kind of combining the income approach and investment math a little bit here together, but I think it helps later on when we get to investment math. So far, are we good? Does everybody sort of understand this process so far? So, with the income, yes ma'am, go ahead.
I just have sort of a question. There was a property that said it made about $600,000 a year in profits, but they were selling it for $200,000. Why would someone do that?
They wouldn't. Somebody's full of something. Well, where is it at? First of all, before I say that, where is it at? Let me go look at it. I might be interested. I might know a guy. It was in Durham, and they said it produced $600,000 a year in profit, which is profit's a pretty vague term because we don't use that terminology in real estate. We use net operating income or cash flow, right, or before tax cash flow. And they wanted $200,000 for it. How many bodies were buried there, or something? It has to be something wrong with it. It has to be. That's one of those too good to be true things. So let's refresh real quickly on how we get to that net operating income. Because at this point, if you can do what I've shown you here, and you can get to a net operating income, then you can do a income approach to value question. So let's just a refresher course real quickly. When we're calculating a net operating income, that's that one big long formula that we have that gets us all the way to before tax cash flow. Does everybody remember that? What do we start with at the top of that formula?
Gross potential.
Gross potential, which is if we are fully rented, nobody's late, no vacancy, right? Everybody's paid, okay? And then from gross potential, we subtract out our vacancy and losses. And what do we come up with?
Gross
effective.
Gross effective. Now, what good is gross effective? By the way, this is all the rent we've actually collected. The gross effective is the rent it's actually collected. What's the only purpose of that number? What's its one purpose for existing? To calculate the management fee. We would not care about the gross effective income for any other reason. We would just start subtracting all this stuff and it wouldn't matter. But our management fee is going to be calculated based on this number, so we need to know that number, okay? So, management fee comes from here, and in fact, we're going to start subtracting out all those operating expenses like the management fee. What else comes out in our operating expenses here?
Utilities, repairs.
Utilities, maintenance.
Almost all expenses except for mortgage and debt services.
How about property taxes, right? And marketing. And Leanne said everything except,
I said almost.
well, I'll go,
Okay,
I think everything's all right. Everything except principal
Debt service.
and interest. Debt service, right? Everything else is coming out here. And that's going to give us our good buddy here, net operating income. Now, if we wanted to go further and we wanted to subtract out our debt service, what do we end up with down here at the bottom?
Cash flow. Cash flow.
Before tax cash flow. Okay? So I'm going to write an example one over here, and we're going to work together to calculate the income value for our property. All right, let's say we're trying to value a subject property that is an office building that has 115 office units that rent for $1,200 per month each. Okay? we have 7% vacancy. And we have a total of $12,500 in rent collection losses. The annual property taxes on the property are $27,500. We have a management fee of 10% of gross effective. We have maintenance expenses, maintenance and other expenses of, let's say, $78,000 a year. Okay? So, our subject property is 115 office units that rent for $1,200 a month each. It has 7% vacancy with $12,500 in rent collection losses, and property taxes of $27,500, a management fee, which is 10% of the gross effective income, and the annual maintenance of $78,000. Additionally, what they've told us is that there has been a recently sold comparable property that sold for $3,457,000 that had a net operating income. So it sold for $3,457,000 and had a net operating income of $287,000. And they want us to calculate the total value of our subject property. So, if we go back to our T-bar for IRB, and I'll put it over here, and then we'll work on this board. The income capitalization approach, up here on the top is the net operating income, down here on the bottom is the value and the cap rate. So they're asking me to calculate the value of the property. What does the T-bar say we ultimately need to do?
Cap rate.
We need what?
Yeah, you got the net operating expenses.
We want net operating income divided by capitalization rate. That's what ultimately we want to get to, correct? Okay? So, we're going to need to know the net operating income, which we don't have, but we have the information it takes to get there. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay? So let's calculate that NOI while I still have the formula written down over here. To get NOI, I need to start with gross potential income. Well, how do I come up with gross potential income based on that information?
115 units times 1,200 months times 12 months.
115 units times $1,200 monthly, and everything over here is annual, so what am I going to do with that?
Times 12.
Times 12 months. What do I come up with for our gross potential income?
I got $1,656,000.
$1,656,000. Gross potential income. Everybody okay with that number? Good? Now it says we're supposed to subtract out our vacancy and our collection losses. What did it tell us about vacancy over there?
7%.
7%. So what is 7% of our gross potential income?
12.
How much?
115, 920.
115, 920?
Yes.
Okay, that's my vacancy. And what about the collection losses?
12,500.
12,500, right? Subtracting those out because they give us annual collection losses. So what do I come up with here now for my gross effective income? I'll put it on this side. What's my gross effective income?
1,527,580.
$1,527,580. Everybody okay with that number for gross effective income? $1,527,580, which is simply my gross potential minus my vacancy, minus my collection losses over here. Is everybody all right with that number? Yes? All right. Why is that number reported again? What do I calculate based off of that?
Management fee,
My management fee. So, my management fee is how much over there?
10%.
10% of my gross effective income, so 10% of this number is going to be
152,758.
152,758 annually, $152,000, $152,758 annually for a management fee. What other expenses do we have there?
Get taxes.
Taxes of how much?
27,500.
Okay, 27,500 in taxes. What else?
Maintenance and others, 78,000.
$78,000 in maintenance and et cetera. Anything else? Are we good? That's everything, right?
Yep.
That's everything we got over there. So I'm going to take my gross effective income of $1,527,580, and I'm going to start subtracting my operating expenses out. That's going to give me my net operating income. What is that net operating income?
I got 1,269,322.
1,269,222?
322.
322. So $1,269,322 in net operating income on that property. Everybody agree with that number? Now, that's what's going in the top of my T-bar over here, correct? Fill it in. 1,269,322. What else do I need for my T-bar? And I'm going to erase this. Is everybody good that I can erase this? Yeah, need it for another second.
Value.
Either the value or the cap rate.
Well, I'm trying to calculate the value. The question's asking me for
The
Cap rate.
value, so I need to know a capitalization rate, correct?
Yep.
Am I good to get rid of this now? Everybody good? So, calculate my cap rate. Where should I look?
The
The
comp.
comp.
At the comp. The comp is going to give me my cap rate. So I need to come back over here and look at my buddy, the comp. And I'm going to erase the stuff about my property here now. Told us that my comp sold for $3,457,000, and it has a net operating income of $287,000. Well, my T-bar is exactly the same. NOI on top, cap rate, value down here. But what am I looking for on this particular T-bar now?
The cap.
Yeah.
I'm looking for the cap rate. I'm trying to calculate the cap rate so I can send it back over there, right? Trying to figure this out. So I need net operating income divided by value. My net operating income is $287,000. My sold price, which is the value of that property, was $3,457,000. What is $287,000 divided by $3,457,000?
8.3%.
8.3%?
No.
So I have an 8.3% cap rate, which I'm going to apply back to my subject property over here. So now the formula says it's my net operating income of $1,269,322 divided by my capitalization rate of 8.3%. What is my value of this property?
$15,293,036.
$15 million.
Mm-hmm.
293,
293, yeah.
And how much?
36.
So we'll just say $15,293,000.
Real world question about that number
Yep.
is if you're buying that for a client or
Yep.
selling that to a client,
Mhm.
is the commission rate lower or is it?
Why does he want to know about commission? What's that got to do with anything?
I mean,
You don't wanna make 3% of that?
I'll make whatever of that.
Yeah, I'm
I'm just saying,
Any portion.
it's like, it's a reasonable question, like, that's a gigantic number.
It's probably still 2.5%, 3%.
Wow, okay.
But you'd probably work on that sale for 3 years.
You're probably right.
I mean, and that's a really truthful response. I mean, it would probably take you 2 to 3 years. It'd probably take you a year to find the property and another year to 2 years to work through the negotiation, contracting, closing process for a property like that. So it's a 3-year endeavor. You'd make $100,000 in commission. Ish. So it couldn't be and it wouldn't be the only thing you worked on for 3 years, obviously. But you know, it's commercial real estate is a very slow, long-term investment process, especially on the purchase side. But you know, when you get that payday, it's a nice one. I have a friend in the business who closed not long ago a $75 million deal. He worked on it for 6 years, including flying buyers and airplanes over the property and multiple times. You know, there's a lot of investment of time, energy, and money in marketing that property. But $75 million. And he was the listing agent, 5%. The buyer was unrepresented. Yeah.
Just see
So
just how much money.
It's
that-
$3.5 million.
If you had like 2 or 3 comps, would you just do like we did earlier and you would add the 3 cap rates together in 500?
Yes, if you had more than one comp property. Yes, her question was if I had 3 comps, would I have calculated a cap rate for each one and then averaged them together? And the answer would be yes, that'd be exactly what you would do. If they give you more than one, usually on the test, they're probably only going to give you maybe one other comp, you know, because just for time, they don't want you spending 10 minutes on one question. But in theory, if you, in the real world, you try to want to find probably 2 or 3 at least comps, maybe even 4, so that you can get kind of an average capitalization rate. Because you want to kind of protect against, you know, one person just went off the reservation and paid way too much for a property, and so it skews the cap rate for that one. All right.